Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast, episode number 132 of the show. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week I have 6 new LitRPG titles just for you folks at home. That includes How to Train Your Kaiju, a LitRPG Kaiju thriller. After that it'll be Steamtown Chronicles, book number 1, The Dark Market. And then after that it'll be Taint Team. This is a short story from a Caverns and Creatures series. After that it'll be Maelstrom, book number 2. Then it'll be The Path, which is the 14th book in the Just Cause universe, but it is an independent standalone LitRPG story. So there you go. And last but not least, it'll be The Office Wars Lab Coats Optional, which is the 3rd book in that particular series. Before we do that, we're going to move on to LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with our story with Aileron Kong. To celebrate reaching 2,000 reviews on Amazon for the Chaos Seed series, Aileron Kong has donated $1,000 to the Wounded Warrior Project and will match donations of up to another additional $1,000. So far, LitRPG fans have donated an additional $675. So we'll have a link in the show notes for you guys if you want to go donate to that particular project and have Aileron match an additional $1,000. So 1,000, 1,000, 2,000, get it? So there you go. So it's a nice, good project and, gives to a good cause. In other LitRPG news, we have Life's Reset. Shimmer Kudzins, I'm probably saying that wrong, but it's the author of the Life Reset series, recently received a 3D printed model of the main character for his series. He was nice enough to share some pictures of the model online, and is even contemplating arranging for it to be made into a production model so that fans can purchase it as well. In the meantime, Jeff Hayes took to cosplaying to the next level and dressed up as the same character during Dragon Con this year. So I'll zoom in a little bit so you guys can see both the figurine that Shimmer got, and also Jeff Hayes, who's the audiobook narrator, and he dressed up as the same character. So here he is as that same goblin, this one right here in the visual version of the podcast. Okay, and Sneezy McSneezy me over here. We'll move on to the next story. Rogue Dungeon has just been selected by Audible editors for the best-selling new release in fantasy for September. The editors at Audible only get to make one recommendation per category per month. So congrats to James Hunter for making that particular list. So hopefully he's going to get a lot of sales, get LitRPG and a story introduced to a whole broader audience. So good for you, James Hunter. Super proud of you, man. Okay, in the Wizards and Warriors Choice Awards, which is an awards done by the fans in the LitRPG Facebook group, basically the votes are in. Here are the winners. For the Wizard Award, which is the best LitRPG series, Aileron Kong was the winner of that for the Chaos Seed series. For the Warrior Award, which is for best LitRPG book, we have Dakota Kraut with The Ritualist. And finally, for the new award, for the best new LitRPG author this year is Carrie Summers with the Stonehaven League. So congratulations to everybody who won. So congratulations. And last but not least in LitRPG news, we have DragonCon 2018 is now over, folks. But personally, I made a couple of videos showing off some of the highlights, including recording for the Cyberpunk and Technology and YA panel, which had our very own Michael Chatfield and Aileron Kong on it. We'll have a link in the show notes for others. And go to our YouTube page. It's under Geek Bites Podcast. That's just the first podcast I did, so that's what's there on YouTube. But also has all the YouTube video versions of this particular podcast and the LitRPG audiobook podcast as well. But these are the little fun little things. So it's basically just like a trek through Dragon Con, some of the highlights, and of course that panel, which is all super fun and interesting. So you get to see some of the fun little highlights that we had. I'll actually show it in the video show notes or the video version of the podcast. You can see some of the fun thingies there. So all kinds of nice things, including dancing, cosplay, but mostly hanging out with friends was probably the best part of the con for me this year. Just seeing all the LitRPG groups and authors and fans even. We all kind of hung out at different locations at different times, but it was certainly the highlight for me to just see everybody and to hang out with them. So thank you everybody who I got a chance to meet and to hang out with. Hopefully we'll see you again next year. There you go. Okay, and that is it for LitRPG News. We have a few stories that are out now. These are stories that have come out. I haven't reviewed them, haven't had a chance to read them, and there was a lot because I recorded last week's audio podcast a little early on a Monday, and so there's been a week and a half between then and now for things to come up, and so there's a long list of things that have actually come, including Dan the Adventurer, a Gamelit Harem Fantasy Adventure Golden Girls Glory book number 2 that's out now, as is the 4th book in the Project Chrysalis series. Coast on Fire, the 5th book in the System Apocalypse series, is out now, as is Crystal Shards Online book number 3, Shards Wraith. That's out as well. Galactic Badlands by Zachariah Dracolis. This is a new series from him. He called it a LitRPG Space Western. So I'm kind of curious to see how that one goes. Also, by Ivan Call, Guildmaster LitRPG Adventure, Tower of Power book number 1 is out as of now. So is Nightmare Keep, Euphoria Online book number 2. Remember, book number 1 came out last month, or about a month ago. And this book actually also has the audiobook out concurrently. So the audiobook and the ebook are both out at the same time, which is not easy to do. So congrats, Phil Tucker, on even just getting that done. So good job. Also out is The Clan's Honor, a LitRPG Adventure by Riley Mercer. And these are a couple new ones that I just happen to see that are floating around the LitRPG, including, let's see, Tales and Schemes, L, and a Demon Lord's Virtual Magic Life Tutorial Zone. So there we go, a couple new ones there. Now, in new LitRPG audiobooks, there are actually quite a few new LitRPG audiobooks that have come out recently as well, including Crafter's Passion by Chris Nee, War Eternist number 3, The Calling, narrated by Jeff Hayes and Annie Ellicott, and Sambu Theater, that is out as an audiobook. The Goblin Siege, Codename Freedom, book number 2 is out as an audiobook, as is Realm Varkon, book number 4, Shadows of the Great Forest. The Slayer is also out, and of course, I just mentioned this, Nightmare Keep, as that is both an ebook and an audiobook. Okay, on to upcoming LitRPG, which I just read off the titles I know are coming out. On September the 8th, The Song Mistress should be out. On September the 10th, it'll be Dead Gods, Land of Dreams, book number 2. On September the 15th, it'll be Urbernian Passage, a LitRPG mystery. September the 24th, Game Changer, that's Reality Benders, book number 3. On September the 26th, it'll be Free Haven Online, Lady Thunderlord into Hades. On September the 28th, it'll be Couch Potato Chaos, Gamebound. And then on October the 8th, it'll be Kingdom of the Dead and NPC's Path, book number 2. New to the list, it'll be Shadow of Song, The Bard from Barluna, book number 2. And on November 21st, it'll be Free Haven Online, Winter Dungeonland, book number 3. So there we go. On to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, folks, we're going to be with a review of How to Train Your Kaiju, a little bit of kaiju thriller, Kaiju Wars Offline, book number 1. It is written by N. Knight. It is 273 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. It's not a game. It was supposed to be a new tool for anger management. The deal was, I helped beta test their new video game and get a microchip implanted in my hand to monitor my responses. And I get out on early parole. I have anger issues. And now mom's dying. Staying in prison, even if it's for a few months, isn't an option when she's got so little time left. But a lot of things don't make sense. For example, why is dad, who ditched mom for another woman only a few years after I was born, so keen on making me go to college? And why on earth is the mysterious company whose game I'm playing willing to pay so much money as an incentive to attack certain targets in their game? And the game. I've never played anything like this. I'm a kaiju, a giant monster, an avatar of destruction. It's immersive and empowering, and it just might be my ticket to taking control of my life. Until a kaiju shows up on campus and the entire world changes. So there we go. Short version of this is an interesting kaiju fight story. Giant monsters fighting each other like Godzilla, Mothra, etc. These are all very lizardy based. But the LitRPG game parts, they just aren't entertaining. They're not really good. So the gameplay kind of reminds me of Rampage with levels, health bars, rage meters, stats, and special abilities. And the focus of the game portion is to essentially crush and destroy buildings, cars, people's tanks, and eventually alien spaceships. As it gets progressively harder. As you stay in the game as a kaiju until you die. So the goal of the game is to destroy as much as possible until you're killed. And through that experience, you level up, you get experience points, you get health stuff. And the story itself is supposed to be like a redemption story. Like the main character is this loser. He's in jail when the story starts off, and this is his ticket out. But and it's, I can kind of see how that story kind of progresses in the novel, except that it's the journey there to redemption and to heroishness is kind of filled with a lot of wine. And for me, that was an issue. The main character complains just about everything through the entire novel, especially the early portion of the story, about like how his dad left, what was him. He has anger issues that get him into trouble. His mom apparently gets sick at some point, and he has bad circumstances, and everybody thinks he's worthless, and maybe he is. And like I said, there's a whole lot of wine in this story, and it doesn't extend just to him, but also the other characters in the story. Like his cousin also has, for some reason, she's like super rich and hot, but she whines about everything, including how much she hates her dad, his political friend. I'm like, okay, this is awful lot of wine without having any like bread to soak it up with. And eventually the story just not entertaining for me, at least. There are, like I said, story-wise, there were a few neat twists, especially towards the end of the story. But overall, it's just kind of an excuse for kaiju fights, which is fine if that's all you want in the story. The kaiju fights are okay. I actually really like the illustrations the author put in the story for each kaiju. They're really interesting and neat and detailed, and I like the visuals. But the game itself is not particularly entertaining because the playstyle, like there is a little PvP in there with kaiju versus kaiju fights, but it's a small part of the story. Like the actual gameplay is minimal, and in the story, the LitRPG or the RPG sections they're kind of minor. Besides the first character sheet you see with the main character when he creates a character, that's kind of all you really see in the story. And there are like these huge gaps in the novel where it's like, oh, these summaries where the main character goes from like level 4 to like 10, and it's like a paragraph summary saying, oh, I killed a lot of things, and look, I'm level 10 now. And so you can kind of tell just from like those little summaries, and that happens again in the story, that the game portion isn't really super important to the story. So for me, like, again, those things like that just made it not entertaining. It is LitRPG technically. The main character levels, he gets special skills, he gets abilities, he does get XP, and he does become more powerful as the story goes on, so it hits the minimum requirements of that. But again, it just wasn't particularly entertaining, for me at least. I know other people online really just like the kaiju fights for what they were, and that's cool. It just wasn't enough for me personally. So it gets a score of 5 out of 10 for me. That's How to Train Your Kaiju, a LitRPG kaiju thriller with a score of 5 out of 10. Next, we have Steamtown Chronicles, book number 1, A Dark Market, an NBC Gamelit novella written by R.J. Castellane. It is 104 pages, $1.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Delman McDougall lived in a relatively comfortable life compared to most. He had his enchanting shop, his flat above it, and his health. He even had a friend, but not everyone can make that claim. All he had to do was follow the mandates given him by the Governor Law, Steamtown's infamous steward. Non-citizens of Steamtown, called travelers, didn't make sticking to the mandates easy, though. They robbed him. They killed him, forcing him to resurrect. They hurled insults at him for being a dwarf and calling him an NPC, whatever that is. But when one traveler attacked his only friend in the world, Delman eagerly abandoned his mandates and fought back. He earned himself a bounty for that, forcing him to hide underground. Now, fugitive Delman must do everything in his power to gain his freedom again, and that means clearing his bounty by whatever means necessary. The alternative, being captured by the guards and locked up in Steamtown stockades for the rest of his life, was not an option. So there, I think that actually does a really good job of introducing the main meat of the beginning part of the story. It's actually a more interesting story than even that novel description describes. This is a story told from the point of view of the NPC who goes beyond what he's prescribed to do, and the restrictions aren't programmed. So this isn't necessarily the story of a computer game NPC who's confined by his code to not do and to do other things. Instead, the prescriptions are social, the oriented. So they're like laws from like the governing body, but also like social conventions within this fantasy-esque society. And when the main character breaks them to save his friend, or try to at least, he's forced outside of those boundaries. And that's a very interesting story, in my opinion, of that opportunity to grow and to change. But also it's a very interesting way that the author describes this fantasy game RPG world, basically. And the game mechanics in the story are going to be rather familiar to people. They're essentially pulled from general MMO stories, but also specifically from like Thief and Elder Scrolls. There's a little bit of crafting in the story too, but for me, what the novella shows is there's just the exploration when the main character goes searching for his friend and the gradual revelation of what the world really is, who he really is, and it's really done well in my opinion, and it doesn't ignore the action and adventure that readers expect either. There's definitely a lot of gameplay, a lot of good action adventure, but also like some good just like stuff that's nice. There's also even a dungeon crawl. Like I said, everything in the novel is really well done, and I think this is probably my favorite read of the entire week, just because partially I had no expectations going into this. Like the the author sent me a link saying, hey, my novel is available, I know you've reviewed my other stuff. This one is not necessarily lit RPG. I'm gonna call it Gamelit. So if you don't want to read it, that's fine. And then I took a look at it, again, not really expecting anything, and I was just like, oh, there's just some really good parts in there, and there's not just like good game mechanics and good gameplay, but also like a very good story, and I'm like in like an NPC fashion. There aren't a lot of NPC stories told from the point of view of, you know, those non-player characters. They're always like the PCs, the player characters, the heroes, people from our world going to their world, and this one is definitely told from a different point of view, and I liked that viewpoint, that cultural explanation from that outlook. That was really, that felt fresh. I mean, I've read some other stories that are similar to it, but there aren't a lot, and I think this one adds a good little bit of a different point of view in Little RPG. So for me, it did a good job, good character building, and for me, it's even though it's 104 pages, it hit like a really nice sweet spot of like having enough time to do good world building, good character development, but not being so long that anything felt really dragged out. Like it was really nicely paced, and I think it was a nice sweet spot as far as like up story length. But by the time I hit the end, I was just like, oh, this is good, and like it just felt fulfilled. It's like a nice meal that just like filled you up just enough without making you feel bloated. So good job. For me, it gets a score of 8 out of 10. That's the Steamtown Chronicles book number 1. The Dark Marketplace, an NPC Gamelit novella. Again, it added to me not just a good story, but it added an extra element of like, oh, this is neat, this is interesting, this feels a little fresh, and I appreciated that. So for me, it gets an 8 out of 10. There we go. On to number 3, it's going to be Taint Team, Caverns and Creatures by Robert Bevan. He's the author of the Critical Failure series. This is a short story in that same series with the same characters. Really easy review. It's 50 pages, $2.99, so it's a little pricey if you're just going straight, but it's also available on Kindle Unlimited, so you can read it there as well. The author description. When Cooper wakes up with the mysterious bumps on his taint, will he and the Caverns and Creatures gang be able to piece together enough the previous night in time to stop the curse from spreading? And there you go. That's it. That's as serious as it gets. Like Robert Bevan actually does a lot of these short stories in between the releases of his main series, and they're always funny. They're super inappropriate. And remember, this author really does a lot of potty humor. There's a lot of like sexual humor, a lot of cursing galore. And if you're in like Kevin Smith kind of movies, you're probably really going to enjoy this. I do. I personally like that kind of humor. But if you don't like that kind of humor, don't read this. It's probably going to offend you in some way, shape, or form. But for me, I love seeing these characters again. Just going on those like little short module adventures, and it's always super funny. So for me, it gets a score of 7.3 out of 10. Funny for me, but again, specific type of humor. So if you don't like potty humor, if you don't like cursing, don't read this. It's probably gonna offend you. But if you're okay with those things, this is probably one of the funnier series of books with the Critical Failure, these short stories that I like in the genre. Okay, on to number 4, Maelstrom book number 2, a Portal lit RPG novel written by Edgen K. Denick. It is 298 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Even gods tremble. After a lifetime of suffering and service towards his kingdom, Galadriel was shattered as the wicked god Bardos killed what he most cared for, the princess. Thrust into a fantastic new world filled with monsters and new dangers around every corner, he was driven by grief and anger. Galadriel was denied Bardos the only thing powerful enough to rival his own, divine might out of spite, and became a thorn in the god's side. Bardos in his fury destroyed everything and anyone within his reach. Galadriel's life took a turn for the worse after getting conscripted by force to stop an ancient evil that threatened to destroy the capital city of Nithron and what remained of this old civilizations. That's all one sentence, folks. an all-out war between Bardos and his armies of self-proclaimed light and the struggling races is forced upon him. Will anyone survive the oncoming war that would engulf all of the living and the undead, or would the slate be wiped clean and a new game of suffering put in progress? Okay, so those... Okay, there you go. That's the author's description. No judgment on that, but again, that actually describes the larger novel as a whole, not just like the premise of it. For me, this is, I'm giving this a bad score. I thought I'd try out book 1 of this, or book 2 in the series rather, despite not actually enjoying book 1. I thought book 1 was a little bit boring, and I listed a whole review on it. Ended up giving it a 5 out of 10. The author mentioned that he'd rewritten the novel after he and his co-writer parted ways. And I honestly generally went into this hoping that book 2 would have addressed all those issues. Had book 1 become an amazing story. I really hope that it would have been. Unfortunately, it's not the case. Like, there are still good things in the novel. I'm not saying it's like you know, it's completely bad, but there are a lot of things that just like ruined my enjoyment of the story. On a game mechanic level, the things are about the same as they were in book 1. Generally familiar MMO concepts like character creation sheets, stats, levels, classes, damage notifications are all very, you know, consistently used in that respect. Like you probably see the damage notifications the most in the story, and that's like the most recurring game mechanic. However, there are other mechanics that are just wavy as all heck. And that includes several times in the novel where someone suddenly has a new power or they transform, and there's really no setup for it. There's no like game mechanic that allows it or describes it. It's just like, oh, look, suddenly it's like a Super Saiyan transformation without any of the training or setup for it. It just doesn't make sense in the story, but it still exists. And the author kind of says at the beginning of the story, even as like a preface to the novel, saying, oh, that the game world grows and changes around the characters. So be aware of that. And to me, it really felt like an excuse to kind of wave away these frustrating inconsistencies. But the author does forewarn, obviously, in the beginning, saying that, oh, not everything's going to always be consistent because basically. Now, story-wise, it was basically kind of boring to me. The novel is a combination of a level grind story with the main character getting like unique powers, and it's mushed with this recurring emotional torture of the bad guy. And the emotionality between this one and the first book is probably, it definitely ratcheted up to like 10. Like the emotional expressions and like the bad things that happen to the main character in book 2 is definitely like, oh, that's rather cruel. But it just didn't really work for me because I never really personally got a lot of reason to even care that the main character was going through these emotional states. It's just, yeah, he kind of likes a lady, but that's kind of the only thing I know about him. You don't get a lot of backstory. You don't get a ton of like information about what motivates him besides a general dislike for the like hate for the bad god. And it's just, you know, it just didn't work. And overall, the fights, even though they are visually written, that's all they are. They're just like fight, pause for some emotional torture of the main character, then fight, and that's all it really is. And it's like, it just wasn't enough for me. There are some, again, things that improve from book 1, like the fight descriptions are probably a little bit better than they were in book 1. There's a lot of emotional evocation. There are, again, good attempts at creating backgrounds, not just for the main character, but also secondary characters and like the orcs and the countess. Like, I think I was surprised that I want to say weapon, but the countess character got a whole backstory. I was like, oh, that's surprising. But it kind of gets ruined. Like, all those attempts kind of get ruined because of the dialogue. And this is kind of a thing that just stuck in my brain. It's just like, everybody sounds the same in this story, whether it's the main character or a weapon or like some orc or some new guy that comes in. Like, they all sound very similar. Like, nobody has a unique voice or a unique speech pattern, and they all use very weirdly modern American slang, even though this is a fantasy story set in a different world where like nobody's from Earth. Basically, nobody's from Earth or even America. I think one of the main characters from book 1 might have, like, I can't remember, but like everybody else in the story shouldn't be using slang and these idioms the same way that I would, basically. And I'm like, oh, it's just one of those things that is like, oh, that kind of drew me. I was saying, oh, this doesn't match. One of these things does not match with the other. And it just kind of ruined even like the attempt at world building that was done. Overall, again, the story elements in the game just didn't really do it for me, but it was the frustrating dialogue that prevented me from like really enjoying anything. And the powers that kind of came up that were inconsistent, they kind of pushed it into dislike. So I was like, so for me, score 4 out of 10. I just didn't think it was like entertaining. I actually disliked some of the things that were happening in the story. And again, I don't dislike the author. The author is really nice. I want to make sure this is really clear because the author has been messaging me several times and seems like a generally nice dude. But this story, I could not get behind it. And as I kept reading, it's just like, this and I just went into dislike for the story. So that's the score of 4 out of 10. That's Maelstrom, book number 2, a portal LitRPG novel with the score of 4 out of 10. Okay, on to our fifth review, The Path, Just Cause Universe, book number 14, written by Ian Thomas Healy. There we go. It is a 237 pages, $4.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited either. Here's the author's description. Trapped in the game. Vanitha is the world's greatest parahuman hacker who can physically enter computer systems to control them from the inside. To relax, she's created a Hindu-themed multiplayer online role-playing game called The Path. When a mystery presents itself, she goes to investigate the strange, new malevolence. It kills her. She awakens inside the game as a new character, unable to use her parahuman powers to return to the real world, nor can she access any of her administrative privileges. She can't even speak her own name. With no other option, she embarks upon a desperate quest to locate her body, a corpse run that may present her only chance of escape. All the while, the malevolence is spreading like a cancer, rewriting and correcting the game. It's a speedrun where failure will be lethal. Get her body and her powers back before the malevolence destroys the game and everything inside, including her. So there we go. That's actually not a bad description of the novel. It hits upon the main points. I don't think it really touches on the really interesting things about the story, but that's a good gist of it. The story is essentially a mix of sci-fi, Hindu fantasy, and lit RPG, which is actually a unique mix. There aren't a lot of stories that do that mix. I can only think of one other author who's done it before, and I think this one did it a little bit better just because they're not just including Hindu themes about recreation into the game mechanics, but also cultural and social class structures within the game as well. But it also keeps it an interesting flow between fantasy and sci-fi as well. So I thought it was a really, really neat mix. It's a little overpriced at $4.99 for 237 pages. And I think a lot of people aren't going to take a chance on it because it's not on KU either, which is unfortunate. And by no means that it's not a perfect story, but I think the LitRPG and some of the other gaming and cultural aspects of the story will intrigue some readers. So I know this story isn't going to be for everybody, but for me, I'm someone who appreciates things when they're different, when an author tries to do something different, but also still succeeds on the LitRPG side. And I think this one does that to a good degree. The most interesting aspects of the story, and what really sets it apart, is the inclusion of non-Western influences in the MMO game world. The main character, Vanitha Bhatt, is a Pakistani-American parahuman superhero, someone with superpowers. That thing that pulls from the larger series, with the ability to transform herself and enter the control game system. She creates an MMO that uses Hindu ideas for advancement. For example, in the game, players need to earn karma and dharma to advance. Dharma is earned from completing quests or tasks. Karma is earned from acts with good intentions, selfless acts. So without enough of both, a player will be stuck at their current social class level and have limited job choices, levels, powers, and ways to advance. When characters get enough karma and dharma, they can reincarnate and create a whole new character with a higher threshold for both, thus potentially more powerful. It's like increasing the level cap for a character. A player can reincarnate up to 4 times until they reach the highest level Brahmin and become content creators for the game. So that's essentially some of the game systems. You'll still see more familiar game systems in this novel, including MMO concepts like character sheets, classes, XP, stats, skills. Quest rewards include things like Soma, which are like rare health potions, XP, rupees, and Dharma. Again, XP is actually a separate reward. XP can be used to upgrade skills or stats, or even get new skills. And Karma is not given as a quest reward. Instead, again, it has to be earned through genuine acts. Like, for example, early in the story, the main character gives food to some street urchins and she gains some karma. And so the karma dharma aspect is actually a very interesting balance here, because sometimes the quests force her to do perhaps what some might consider evil acts. But to complete the quest, she has to do it, and so she gets the dharma, and then she has to make up for it by doing karmically good acts, I guess. But again, without both of them being maxed out, she can never reincarnate and get to the next social reincarnation, which also allows her to do a new class or new quest. Story-wise, The premise is a little convoluted, I'll admit, and it doesn't really make sense. However, the main character gets stuck in her own game by a mysterious force. She's shipped over admin and cyber powers and is sent to a beta version of the game to start over. And if she dies in the game, she dies permanently. I don't think that the prayer aspect is needed, to be honest. It's a very older cyberpunk concept. The entire game, die in real life, is not needed for me. But I can see why the author did. He wanted to raise the stakes. But to me, it's always a lost opportunity to learn from death as a game mechanic. But it does exist here. Once in the game, which is really, like, the main character is there by the 7% mark, and she's there for most of the story. That's when the story gets interesting. The main character has a power level through as much of the MMO as possible, and to get enough power to try and stop the mysterious force that's destroying the game. The story itself is a little bit slice of life. You get to follow the main character as she creates her characters, goes on some adventures and fights, do some quests, reincarnates, and then starts it all over again. And each time she reincarnates, she does choose a new class. You actually get the opportunity to see several classes that she chooses, and you get to see those classes. There's a tiny bit of depth there for them, but because there are so many in the same story, you don't get the same depth as she had the same class the entire story. So that's a slight drawback. But again, how those classes, and again, these are classes like Thief, Bodyguard, things like that, are perceived in this larger world as not just as like their player class, but also as their social classes. Each time the main character reincarnates, she actually achieves a higher social caste, I should say, within this kind of Hinduish universe, which does really pull from like other Indian and Pakistani like cultural aspects. And I thought that was interesting that she has different job opportunities based upon that social caste aspect, which is again not something you see in general in a lot of LitRPG stories. So it's a very interesting concept. And so through each reincarnation, she's still, again, pulling for that major goal of like getting enough power and like the big reveals about who or what the big bad guy is and what's happening in the story. All that happens as well. So it's pretty neat. And again, it fits in with the reincarnation theme of the game world. I show warn you that the 80% mark of the story, the novel kind of stops being a LitRPG. But for me, the other like 80%, it's fine. But it kind of returns to the main series, I think, concept of like the superhero thing, or maybe just cyberpunk. And the end is a little bit wavy because it does tie in more to the main character's like superpower. But I think the author is trying to again tie it back to the main series. So it is what it is. Just be aware of that. Overall, I like the story. Like I said, it does have some issues on the game mechanics side. It does have some issues on like some of the things not just quite working right to me math-wise, but I liked how the author tried to do something different. He mixes, again, Hindu concepts with game mechanics and a story world. And I just haven't seen that a lot. So for me, it was still enjoyable. And I could also tell the author was trying to straddle the line between creating a LitRPG story and keeping faithful to the existing series. Remember, this is like book 14 in his series about, I'm assuming, these superpower universe, because I haven't read any of those. I'm not really sure. But you could tell like there was definitely like these points in the story, like, oh, he's probably referring to something in the main series. I'm not going to get it, but it's not ruining the story for me either. And at the last 20%, again, it definitely veers towards like, oh, this is that superpower thing that again probably is going to make more sense to people who have read the other like 13 books in the series. So again, the story is a little bit flawed, but again, overall, I like the fact that it was different. I really did enjoy the different kind of game mechanics that are based, again, not necessarily on a Western influence. So I had a good time with it. Overall, it gets a score of 7.1 out of 10 for me. So it's good, just slightly lower on the scale, but it's still an enjoyable story. And again, I know this isn't going to be for everybody, but again, if you want something that's a little culturally different, I think you'll really enjoy this. For me, that's 7.1 out of 10 for The Path to Just Cause Universe book number 14. So there we go. Okay, last review. It's going to be Office Wars Lab Coats Optional by James G. Patton. It's 295 pages. It is $3.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Bran wakes up in Naroma, but he has no idea what happened the previous night. He continues to progress through Office Wars while secrets start unraveling everything he thought he knew. Some secrets could destroy everything, while others open new paths. What future path will Bran's secrets reveal? Vicky returns, but is she who Bran thought she was? Plenty of laughs, more introspection, and a conclusion to this session of the Office Wars inside. Do not worry, you will see Bran and his friends in future series. All Take Online series operate in the same multiverse. You might even get a few hints at other stories that I'm writing or have written. So that's the author's description and note to the reader. Again, $2.95. 195 pages, $3.90. Not available in Kindle Unlimited, so that's unfortunate. But it's not priced badly. This is the third book that wraps this arc in the series, and honestly, there's really good humor here. But it's the Office Wars part is mostly a dungeon crawl, and I'll have to admit that the Office Wars portion of the story, which is a good middle section of the novel, it kind of got a little repetitive to me. I didn't feel like there was anything particularly new in the Office Wars section of the story that I hadn't seen in books 1 and 2 already. And that's unfortunate. I think it's one of the things that I like the most about the game portion of the series is that the Office Wars parts felt very fresh in book 1. Like it felt like super amazing. I really absolutely loved it. In book 2, you get it back again, but you still get some new gaming aspects, which still, kept you going. In book 3, the Office Wars parts felt like, I read that in book 2 already. Is there anything really new? And I'm like, besides a few themed monsters and a few new game mechanics or power-ups, like, not really. But there are the things that really do kind of save this novel, including a return to the Office Space style of humor, which was a huge highlight in book 1 and 2. And it does return, but it returns towards the mid to end portion of the novel, so you're not going to see it early in the story necessarily. But once it does return, the pace picks up very quickly, and there's still good action, adventure, and dungeon crawling stuff here. It's just that portion of the story wasn't as entertaining as it was previously. Still, the humor is really good, and the other portions of the story outside of the Office Wars kind of game concept, which is a little more sci-fi cyberpunk. There's some really good stories in there. So like there were some big revelations and there are like plot twists in there. It's like, oh man, these are some good twists. These are some telenovela style like twists. And I was like, but it was entertaining in that respect. So for me, it was kind of close to getting a 6 for me, but like I said, towards the mid end of the story, things really pick up as far as like the humor, and some of the good twists in the story kind of made it for us. So for me, still enjoy the story. I just didn't like it as much as books 1 and 2, but still, it was good for me. If you like the series, this really does wrap up the Office Wars arc pretty well. And it does feel a little rushed in place as far as like the Office Wars game thing. I really thought he was going to extend it out for like 4 or 5 books, but instead the author just decided to push it together with him, which is his prerogative. But you can kind of tell it's a little rushed a little bit. But still, for me, score of 7.1 out of 10. That's Office Wars, lab coats optional. I enjoyed it. So by the end, I was just like, oh yeah, this is fun. This is a nice conclusion with the score of 7.1 out of 10. So there you go. That's it. Probably one of the shortest episodes I think I've recorded in a while. There we go. Thanks for hanging out with me, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, if you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, our webpage, or plenty of other links in the show notes. If you want to support us in any way, shape, or form, remember, this show only exists because you folks at home are nice enough to help cover the cost of this and want to find out how we can support the podcast at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But again, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, ladies and gentlemen. And until we can hang out again, remember to go read some Lit RPG. Goodbye, everybody.